Welcome to the CJP show. Today I'm with Avi Hoffman. Avi knows me as Joshua. I met Avi. He was one of the counselors on a trip across Israel that lasted a month between for high school students. I went on the trip between my junior and senior year, and it was a very shaping experience. It really did shape a lot of my Jewish identity and my Jewishness. And I know going into it, I was like, oh, this is not going to change me. I already been to Israel. I already experienced a lot of those things, but going with a group of people that are your peers, it definitely really did change my view on things. Avi, anything you want to add on that point?
Yeah, I met Josh here at on TJJ, and I was privileged to be one of his advisors. And we've not spoken in a long time, but now it's like a lot of the kids on that bus are calling me now. Like I spoke with maybe 3 of them for the first time in, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, which is really great. And it's so nice to see you again. There's actually there's a special bracha in the Jewish tradition that you say when you don't see a very dear friend for a very long time. For 4
really?
years. Yes. So the custom today, we don't say it with the actual name of God, but I'll say it anyway, without the name of God. And see how good your Jewish education, see how well you can understand this bracha.
Okay,
it goes, Baruch atah Hashem, mechayeh hamesim. So, do you know what that means?
Mesim, no. Actually, this is terrible. I know a little bit of modern Hebrew. I went to Israel to study, but I don't even know the roots of mem. What is that? Chuf yayin? What is that? Or mem chuf yayin?
I'll tell you what it is. So basically, what it means is, "Blessed are you, God, who revives the dead." And
I did know Mes, yeah.
Mesim, yeah. Mechaya, like chai,
yeah,
life. 18. Everyone knows chai. 18. Mechaya, hametim, brings the dead back to life. So it's kind of such an invigorating experience to see an old friend that I always feel like I've been brought back from the dead.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. That's very much the same. I know, at least in my experience, I was very good in my younger years to reach out to those people who actually made a significant difference in my thought processes and everything. And I think in the last few years, I've tried to express that thanks to especially professors, teachers who are there teaching a group of people, and they can't really see the individual impact that they made on me. I try to express that and thank people. So I want to thank you, Avi, for the impact you made on my life and the things that it maybe if I was one of 30-ish kids on the bus, so you might have not noticed, but the way that you conducted yourself and showed yourself with your Judaism definitely shaped my Judaism.
Thank you.
I know prior to the TJJ, I had a very negative view towards Orthodox Jews, because definitely I believe in Orthodox Judaism. There's a lot of looking down on people because they're not practicing the correct Judaism. And I think you showed that you lifted us up rather than looking down on us. And that's how I really want to thank you for that and express that to you specifically.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's so important. So important because like my main ethos is, I don't like it when people look down on me. And believe me, there are people who do that, right? Everyone has that experience sometimes. So as much as I can to do, to push that forward, that's, the driving principle, and also I just don't believe in looking down on anyone for anything, not judging people for what they do. It's not my place to tell them that I've figured something out they haven't. That's, I believe that very strongly, as much as anything.
Well, just one point on the production side, it seems like when you're moving, your mic is rubbing against your clothes. So it's causing some feedback on that side. So if you can
sorry.
pull it, that's all right. It didn't bother me too much. So if it bothers them and the people listening, it sucks to suck. You should talk good, see the good in the world.
That's right.
So that's because you're definitely saying the good things. Definitely. Do you want to speak a little bit more specific about the speaking down from the religious community against other Jews? And I felt like in my elementary, my more adolescence years, that was the sort of the message I was getting, that this is the right way, and if you're not doing it, and it was very counter to the teachings of Chabad. My Orthodox upbringing was in the Chabad Hasidim, and that sort of such a push towards the Hasidim and being happy in it, and not acknowledging the maybe it was because I was learning in my younger years and the curriculum was different for younger kids, but that pushing so hard into it pushed me away. And do you have any words on more specifically on religious pushing down? It sounds like in your life you don't want to make sure that you don't do that, and I can clearly say he did not do that. But what about for the people who do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, something that you may not know, but when I was younger, I had similar experience when I was in yeshiva, right? I was in a very religious school when I was I think I started there in third grade. So third through eighth grade, I had very hard experiences in a very religious school. And, part of it was not only from the administration, although there were some things which were very unfortunate from that end. And I can give you two specific examples. One was that when I was younger, one of the things I loved doing was I was very active in the Boy Scouts, right? I was very active. I actually became an Eagle Scout when I was 17. So that was just such a wonderful experience to be able to go out camping, to do swimming, kayaking, stuff that you never do as a kid growing up in New York City. And to get out of the house and to do those things. And then for the administration to tell me that that was something that they thought wasn't good. They looked down on me, and they were, they kind of said, you shouldn't be doing this. You should be spending more time doing your learning, doing your studying, doing other things. To me, that was very hurtful. It was a very harmful attitude for them to have towards me. And the second thing, the one I take even more exception to, was they gave me such pushback with my magic, right? You remember.
Oh yeah,
right.
That was always fun when you decided to grace us with your magic. It's always, I love the magic, and one of my few YouTube rabbit holes that I fall down at least once every few months, and one of those is magic. Because
that's great.
It's such a great hobby. Me specifically, I have shaky hands, so I can't really practice it, but I really love the idea of the stagecraft and all those things, and how it is really magic from the perspective of the audience, and the magic hands, the strings of the magician I like it as a craft. I like it on the meta of it. I love magic itself, and I really did enjoy you bringing that to the TJJ. Do you recall?
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I'm still very into magic, which, we can talk about another time. A lot to talk about magic in terms of the theory behind it and why magic is important as an art form and all that. And I'm actually currently working on a book for magicians about tricks I've come up with. So still very serious, very serious in the art. But when I was in, 7th, 8th grade, when I started doing magic, I got a lot of pushback from these teachers, these rabbis, and it was very hurtful and it was very harmful. So this attitude and, getting away from there has been one of the driving forces of my life behind my religious identity.
And do you think why, separate yourself from the situation? Why do you think the rabbis, I would say, failed you as being your rabbi? Because they should be your rabbi, not the rabbi. They should conform a little bit, not completely to you, but they should work with you and make sure that your spiritual journey is the correct one, the religious journey is the correct one. And you don't do that by dissuading the hobbies. You find the Jewishness within the hobbies. You find the actual what is a midrash but a story with a good message at the end. There's no reason that you can also find the good message within magic. Why do you think the rabbis had that reaction?
From their perspective, I totally get it, because they were essentially delivering a specific message, delivering a specific type of Judaism. And for someone who's not, let's say, in that mold, to a certain degree, that's not going to be the place for them. Right. So from their point of view, I do hear exactly what, they were thinking, and from their point of view, what they were doing. But from my point of view, and again, I disagree with that mentality, right? I don't agree with that kind of, with that way of building a Jewish school. But from their point of view, they want people who were a very specific, with a very specific track mind, and people who were more engaging in learning. Not that to me that's not important. To me that's very important, vital importance. But yeah, from their point of view, I could understand why they had that pushback. Although I don't agree with that pushback.
I have a proposition for you I want you to think on and give my response because it's something I've been working on, thinking back in my own life and thinking about the back of the lives of a lot of my peers who do come from religious, semi-religious households, and the way that we taught pushed us away from our religiousness. And it seems like only in our 20s with Hillel and other Jewish institutions where they're a lot less controlling, I would call it, that they're coming back to the religion, but only because we got pushed away so early. It's because I think rabbis, the curriculum itself it's a failure. You learn to become lawyers in the good book rather than good life, good good individuals in life. And I think the rabbi needed to shift the curriculum itself into make good what I think the point, let me bring that back a little step. Where do you learn from is with your parents, with your schooling. And I think the parents should help you learn how to live life. The rabbi should be on that, learning how to live a spiritual or fulfilling life. And I think the school as a whole should teach you how to reason, how to logic. And the actual courses itself are just samples of how to do it within these curriculum. And I don't think the goal of school is to help you find a job later. No, it should be to help you reason, how to logic, to think through things, Socratic method. And I think if the rabbis realize that, they would step back and realize my job isn't to just instill the curriculum. It's for the growth of the individual, and let's grow the religious and individual, the spiritualness in each of my students. And I think that the curriculum and how the current education system is, and in my education system in the Jewishness was a failure because they didn't step back enough and actually think about what is the goal. Maybe I'm wrong with my goal of what I think education ought to be, but I think if we do change the goal and we express it to our to students, they will be a lot more reciprocate to the learning instead of turning away from it. How do you feel about what I just said?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you raised some very good points. And, far be it for me to say what the goal of education should be, because that is such a meta question and such a hard question to, tackle. And I would also say there's probably not one goal of education. Education is such a multifaceted and important thing. It's really, it doesn't boil down to one or to anything, but for sure raising very, very important points about what education shouldn't be. And that might be an easier question to ask, because it's always easier to point to problems with anything as opposed to fixing anything, because problems are just easier to spot than solutions. Not to say we shouldn't raise those problems, we absolutely should, but education is very complicated. And as a teacher, now that I've become a teacher, I can see that more and more.
Let's actually circle the conversation into more of the teaching and educating part.
Sure.
Because I know in my life, maybe I would finish off with my career and go to teaching. I want to make money first, so I don't want to have my full career in teaching. But I definitely love learning, and the way I love learning is from the perspective of throughout high school, I didn't care too much about the grades. Maybe it was like my self-worth and my ego that cared, but no deeper than that, where I was literally going in to learn the basics about each of the fields that I was learning. In biology, I was trying to learn about life itself. In chemistry, I was trying to learn about matter itself. In AP environmental sciences, I was trying to learn about environmental science, not the grades that were required. In my history class, I'm trying to learn about the lessons in history. And I think if we can actually convince the students that this is the goal of the education, yeah, you're going to get good grades as a byproduct of being invested within the learning. And I think it's not too bad to ask what is the point of education, because I think you shouldn't start educating until you ask the most fundamental questions. If you don't have the answer to the final why, what are you doing? You're just creating the game out of nothing. Game system, which is, I think it's a common conversation every election cycle. You say, what would you do to fix the education system? And my answer is, first, we have to be honest. What the education system is? Is it there for national defense? Is it there to indoctrinate children? Is it there to mold children in a way that the government seems necessary? Or is it to make good citizens that can have good, thoughtful thought processes and come to good conclusions? And I think it's the latter. And once you get to the latter, we can start educating. So as an educator, how do you feel about education as a field?
Oh, it's so important.
That big why.
So, so I have the great privilege of being not a teacher, but an assistant teacher.
Mm.
And what that means is I'm in many different classrooms in any given day, and I get to see a lot of
What age
different
range?
teachers. I'm with eighth grade, but I also teach sometimes during my off time, which is very little. They have me teaching seventh grade, sixth grade, even fourth grade. So like within those grades, I'm in
I think
a day school, so they go up to eighth grade.
a Jewish day school.
Yeah,
All right. You don't have to
Manhattan
go.
Day School in
You don't have to
Roanoke.
go to the specifics of everything. You just let's ask. And do you teach the religious or regular studies?
Everything.
Oh, everything. I
So so I get to see all these different kinds of teachers in so many different settings, so many different styles, and it's really useful for me because I want to be a teacher. I want to be an educator. I get to see what works, what doesn't work, how they function, different styles, different ways of doing the same thing. It's very, very helpful.
Okay, and my next question is, do you feel like is it the way that you teach Jewish studies versus secular studies, or the way you teach is the same for both those?
So that's a good question. I never really thought about it actually. I think that for me, I'm kind of the same person for both things, and I do kind of approach them very similarly. I have a very academic approach when I do everything. So it's always about trying to get the kids to ask the right questions. And yeah, I would say that it's pretty much the same thing, pretty much the same way. Now, there's some topics that I'm more passionate about than others, right? Like
Okay.
I'm more passionate about history than science, for
Oh,
example.
history is my favorite class throughout every year.
So good.
I love history, and I don't understand people like they're stories about dead people. I'm like, yes, exactly. The stories about dead people, so you don't have to die for the same reasons they died. That's the
Exactly.
point. But more specifically, back to the secular and religious studies, do you see a difference in general? I know your sample size is probably small, and you can't make such great assumptions. You're not doing studies on it, retroactive studies. But do you feel like the religious studies are being taught differently than the secular studies? And how are the students like reacting to those?
Yeah, they are, but for a reason that you might not think. And this might not be a satisfying answer to your question, but I'm teaching mostly eighth graders in the second half of their school year. So they have massive, massive senioritis,
Oh,
and
definitely.
they're already at a point where grades don't matter so much anymore. So the Judaic studies teachers have kind of taken a very lax attitude, not in terms of not teaching, they teach, but it's like, okay, if you guys don't get this, it just won't be on the test. Don't even worry about it.
Mm.
It's okay. You guys are in the second half of your senior year.
During
It's going to be
coronavirus, let's don't forget to
and during
mention that.
coronavirus, exactly. But I'm talking about the 2 months that I was actually in school,
Okay,
right? But
sure.
even now, even more so. It's been crazy, and just seeing, so with the Judaic studies teachers, it has been a little bit different, but I'm sure it would be very different in a seventh grade class and different during a different school year. So I have a
Mm.
very unique, very narrow perspective on this with this very specific situation.
Well, to counter that point, I think that's once again a failure of the school system. If your goal is to get the good grades so you can transfer to a good high school and get into a high school that you want to, then it's of course you're going to slack in the last eighth grade because did all the and you already did all the registration for classes already. If it's anything similar to college registration, it's already happens. But if the goal and what the reason that you're educating and learning is to think better and learn better, of course that's the wrong move. That's a missed
Sure.
opportunity to get better. So if anything, I would hope that maybe my conversation shifts how you educate. Maybe change the goal from actually the grade and change it to do better, think better, be better, something like that. But it sounds like senioritis. Let's actually circle that and change the conversation from educating to educating Judaism. How do you
Yeah.
start the question of what is Judaism? Because for me, it's the practice multiplied by the belief to the power of faith.
Let me write that down. Hold on. Let me because I need that in front of me. What is it? What do you say? It's the
In practice, multi,
practice times what?
belief, all in
Yep.
parentheses, to the power
To
of
the
faith.
power. That is great. Okay, so first question, why do you differentiate between belief and faith? What's the difference?
Uh, Belief is the what you hold. Faith is the leap.
Belief is what you know.
What you hold to be true. I believe. I I would be a belief would be all the things I believe in, even the non-true and non-true things. I believe in evolution. I believe there's a table in front of me because I'm touching and I feel it. So it's a full
Yeah.
range of belief. Faith is the leap of faith. There's with God itself, unless he presents himself right in front of your eyes. You're like, God, present yourself. And a being
Yeah.
teleports in front of you and then says hi and disappears. That faith is the leap.
Okay. And I guess the real important question, when I put an equal sign, what do I put on the other side? Religion, Judaism,
Well, it
spirituality, what's the word you
equals
put on the other side?
well equals your practice or whatever you're doing, like religiously.
Well, practice was the first term. What does this equation equal? What does
Well,
this equation
equals
give
like
you?
personal religion, I would call it.
Personal religion. Okay. Interesting.
Like
Okay.
I don't have the
That sounds
exact
good.
like labels for everything, but I
Very
think
interesting.
Judaism is a very different religion than at least the religions I heard about. It's actually very similar to it's a very practice-based religion versus a belief-based religion. Like I would tie
Can you
more
say
to
that again? It's
Christian.
very similar to.
Actually, I had one of my earlier podcasts. I had a Buddhist on, and with the exception of, it seems like they just didn't write down their oral tradition, and we did. And it seems like the great schism between ours, but they are also a very practice-based religion.
Yeah,
And I
that
would
was one
say,
of the big. When I was doing a lot of research into different faiths, one of the big frustrations in studying Buddhism was there really wasn't these serious canonical texts that I could reference in
mhm,
terms of like a real, like with Christianity, it's so simple. It's the New Testament, it's the church fathers. It's there are things you can look at. With Islam, it's the Quran, the Hadith. With Judaism, it's obviously the Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and different things. But with Buddhism, it was very complicated.
mhm,
It was like really hard to figure it out. It boiled down to a lot of articles on the internet, and I didn't like that.
mhm.
But
Well,
that's neither here nor there. But
uh,
yeah, no, Buddhism's awesome. I'm a big fan. Yeah,
oh
for
yes.
sure.
So, what is Judaism?
So, do you mind if we review your formula, because I think it's
Oh
very
yeah, let's
interesting.
go into my formula. I would
Okay.
love to. I just came up with that about circa. You asked what is Judaism to me. I gave you the answer. That's why, and I feel pretty confident in the formula, all things considered.
Okay.
And faith can be anywhere from 0 to 1, so it's probably a decimal.
Got it. Okay. Cool. So I guess the question we have to ask about Judaism is it an an antinomian religion or a belief based religion or a practice based religion?
What does antimony means?
Antinomian.
My
Well,
SAT words aren't so up to par.
I'm gonna get this confused between nomian versus antinomian, but it means of a faith based on actions versus creedal belief, right? So
Okay.
when you study the religion of Judaism, what's the important part? What makes a Jew, right? And this is part of the comment I wrote on that post. What does it mean to be Jewish? How do we define that term? And what are the important parts of being a Jew, right? How do we define Judaism? Just many different ways of asking the same question. So it's important to frame this the right way, because there are a lot of different ways of looking at this. But just talking about belief, right? Jewish belief. What do Jews believe? What's the
Well,
proper thing for a Jew to believe?
like the
Yeah,
divinity, I think one of the most important is the divinity of the story itself.
the divinity of what do you? Well,
The
so then
five
let's delve into
books,
that. What do you mean?
the 5 books. It's not only just a story. There's some actual like religious aspects to the story that it actually happened, or some that the stories, or at the very least, that we can learn from the stories. Which
Okay.
I would hold that a lot of the Jews today aren't Jewish because they don't give up to the divinity of the story. At least on a religious sense, they aren't Jewish. I like to usually block Jews in the different cultural, ethnic, and then religious Judaism is the three parameters that I usually group Jews in. And I think that would answer a lot of your questions of what is Judaism, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Sure. What are the three groups?
Cultural would be, gefilte fish.
Nice.
Are you a lawyer yet? The practices that are being practiced, I think cultural and religious Judaism is a lot closer. Religious Judaism would be the kippah, the chumash, the siddur, and practicing it. And that practicing will result in having a cultural Jewishness, but you can have cultural Jewishness without that religious practice. And then the last would be ethnically Jewish, and that would be just the ethnic group Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, the different other sects of Judaism. And those could be, I think, only a necessity. Those ethnic doesn't really matter too much to me because I don't really care too much about race and ethnicity. But those are necessitated by the world we live in. And I think the Shoah is the most obvious example where if you're 1/4 Jewish, you're going to get genocided. And I think ethnically Jewish is only important as much as the world makes it important. And those are the lenses I look at Judaism. And I consider myself all three of those Jews, all of the above. It's not an exclusive, it's an inclusive list that you can check multiple boxes in either any of them.
It's a Venn diagram.
Exactly. And there's a lot of overlap.
Interesting. Okay, that's an interesting trichotomy. I like that. I'm gonna think about that. Okay, so to me as a religious Jew, right? To me, and I would identify as an Orthodox Jew.
I do too.
Right. So, but I would also identify as an Orthodox Jew who doesn't, and this ties into what we started with, who doesn't look down on other Jews. And that means, I mean that in the most inclusive form possible. I mean Jews who are Reform. My cousin, one of the people I'm most close with in the whole world, is a Reform rabbi. Stephanie, she's awesome. She's one of my favorite people. That includes conservative Jews. One of my good friends, who's also a magician, is a conservative rabbi, Rabbi Matt. He's really a great person and super fan of everything he does. That includes Jews who choose to not identify as Jewish, Jews who choose to be secular or whatever, however they choose to identify. I believe that's their choice, and then they have to, it's not my place to tell anybody that I figured out something that they haven't. Right? Yeah. To me, that is an essential part of my, identity as a human being, not just as a Jew.
Well, I say my identity is in order. The most center of identity is not being Jewish. The most center of my identity is being a Western liberal, where classical liberal, where personal autonomy, minus like autonomy that cause externalities, but personal autonomy is the most important thing. And then the second part of the onion is my Jewishness. And I think that I identify a lot more with freedom itself than with anything else. And I think me being Jewish is able to fall under, subserves to my more central element more than anything else. And I've been still dealing with that identity and the conflict between those two.
Sure. Yeah, totally. I totally hear that. And that's totally fine. So to get back to Judaism and what it means to me, this is, I think, where we might have the most level of disagreement, because you've given me pretty neat categories of what a Jew is in the world today. To me, more than anything else, what it means to be Jewish is a process, right? Judaism is not this thing which can be pinned down at any one given time in history. It's something which is constantly changing and constantly being revised. And on one leg, just to give, the simplest formulation of what this means, it's that it's complicated, right? What does a Jew have to believe? What does a Jew have to do? These are things that might mean something very different for my grandchildren than it does for me, as it did for my grandparents. And
I would
they're
agree with that sentiment, but I think as soon as we wrote down our oral tradition, that we cemented it, and Jewishness in the religious sphere hasn't
oh,
really
I
shifted that
disagree.
much.
I
Like,
disagree because I think the oral tradition itself and the way in which we wrote it down was 100%, taking into account this multiplicity of opinion. I mean, you cannot go through one page of the Talmud and come to any single conclusion about anything. It's always, well, he felt this way about that, and he felt that way about this, and he felt the other way about that. It's this very big multiplicity, and this is true about every topic, even the most fundamental things. Like you ask the question, like, can you do this action on Shabbat? Can you cook an item this way? Well, he said this rabbi said that thing, and that rabbi said that thing, and the students of this one said something else, and then two people came and interpreted this rabbi one way and the same rabbi another way,
I
right?
point towards the Shulchan Aruch and the set table, and I know that the Talmud we're reading is the same Talmud they read since in the medieval ages, and that I know massively we said in our tradition, it's the good old fiddle on the roof, and it feels like maybe this is just from my own perspective and how little do I know. It's just the same Jews that they were dealing with in 1947, the creation of Israel, surviving off of the fat of secular Jews fighting for the freedom of Israel, that they're still
Mm-hmm.
dealing with the same problems of those Jews in Israel, that a certain sect of Jews aren't conforming to a more new world, because I don't think, like, I'll give the example of kashrut. I don't think kashrut is that important anymore, because we have a FDA and Food and Drug Administration, and we have an ingredients list. And if you fail to do that, there's penalties in itself. And in
Mm-hmm.
some sects, if there's a certain assumption that there isn't going to be like a mess up of kashrut, then so be it. You can, and I think the criticism is to the Orthodox that not the myth that, like you said, some of your closest friends are Reform conservative, certain different types of Jews, that those are maybe as legitimate or even more legitimate in a modern world than the Jews. And that's why I consider myself an Orthodox Jew, a modern Orthodox Jew, but a bad modern Orthodox Jew, because I think the practices are important, but I'm not just
Mm-hmm.
committing to the practices because I'm 20 years old and choosing to live with the vices of the world.
So can I pin down on one thing you said, because I think it's important?
Oh,
I
go
think we
dive
could
deep
spend
in
some time
anything
on.
I say, as I try to
So
dive
you
deep
you
in one point of what you said.
exactly.
Yeah,
So your point about kashrut not being relevant in this world today,
as relevant.
well, that would be if we take a naturalistic approach to the reason behind why we keep kashrut, which some do, but many don't, right? Like if you say the reason we keep kashrut is because that's the healthier, or this food is just healthier for you, then okay, then you're right. Then today with the FDA, with if you follow a good diet, then you should eat whatever you want. But if we say that maybe there's another reason why we keep kashrut, or kashrut is deeper, more important in terms of its cultural, religious significance, in terms of its spiritual, in terms of its metaphysical significance, then it becomes a lot deeper than just a natural, you know, this is what you should eat because it's healthy.
Okay, I don't want to get, like, if you go in more of the healthy things, you're going to have a nutritionist and maybe have a mostly vegan, depending on what part of the world you're from. And that's where I've dealt with a lot of the problems of, I learned the history, and Judaism is an ancient Mesopotamian religion that shifted from multiple gods to a single monotheistic god that went down here. And there is anthropologically a Jewish people and a Jewish nation. At one point, 10% of the Roman Empire was the population of Judea. These things, and I struggled to intertwine my basic knowledge of history and peoples with a religious realm. And I do want to follow Judaism into if there's a metaphysical reason behind kashrut, let's talk about that, and I'll follow it in the sense of in a modern world. If it's really about the health and about keeping a healthy body to keep a healthy neshama, then no, I'll have my food and I'll make sure to live a healthy life. I think that the great schisms of the Jewish world didn't solve the problems I'm dealing with. It the conservative and reform movement didn't solve all the problems that I'm dealing with religious Judaism, and that's where my trouble is. If you don't want to dive in the weeds about kashrut, let's actually, if you want to dive into the weeds about something, let's actually talk about something more fundamental than kashrut. Maybe like
Yeah.
free will versus determinism. And I think free will is the most important question when you're talking about Judaism, because these things are only important in a free world. I believe so.
Okay. The free will determinant. Oh, there's a lot to talk about there. Oh, there's okay.
You obviously are educator, so if you want to start it up with, you want to start us off and build off from there, that would be good. Or if you want to do it through a lens of kashrut, that also works. I don't know enough of the metaphysical reasons of why kashrut's kashrut, just outside of maybe I stopped paying attention in yeshiva at a certain point.
My point isn't really to say we should take the naturalistic reasons versus the metaphysical or other. My point is just to say that there's such a multiplicity of understandings of kashrut that it can't be reduced to purely naturalistic reasons.
Well, I say the best kashrut is to look at all those reasons within the context of your own life and come to the conclusion within your own life, and that is the perfect Judaism, is for you to put in the hard work and then come to the own conclusion. Sure. And that's your personal Jewish relationship with God, and it's not between you and a rabbi, not between you and anybody else. It's between you and God and your what is it called, your counterant or whatever, your Yetzer Hara, your Yetzer Tov, and God, and figure out what is Judaism meant to you. And you can't come to that conclusion until you have enough information, is my point.
Sure.
And
sure.
That is I think I'm a bad Jew because I haven't spent enough time. And that's how I do want it.
I mean, the most important thing, I think, the primal Jewish value is education. Right, and learning more about these opinions and coming to understand Judaism in its own way, and not through the lens of other systems, other cultures. And this is one of the reasons why. Well, one of the reasons why so many things. Well, one of the reasons why sociologists and anthropologists have such a hard time, defining what a Jew is, because it just means so many things, and it's a very complicated system. Right, and it's.
I'll give a very easy example of what it means to be a Jew in Israel is much different than it means what to be a Jew in America, because the problems of a Jew in America is assimilation, and the problems of Jew in Israel might be dealing with people trying to terrorize you. Or even more example, go throughout history, a Jew during the Spanish Inquisition is a lot more similar to the Jew during the Shoah than any of the two examples I gave with Israel and United States. And I think if you step all the way back, we are a people of suffering. We are a people of Lador Vador, in every generation there was that. And I think a lot of those problems is through how we separated ourselves from society and chose not to assimilate within society. And I think those are the same reasons on why we lasted these 4,000 years, 3,000 years, that we are one of the oldest, I always bring up a statistic of there's a very few ethnic groups that have lasted over 1,000 years, about 5 to 20, depending on how you define them. And one of those is Jews. Another one is Romans, ancient Chinese, and there's not that many. Most tribes die out or assimilate within the culture, and that's how they die out. And Jews is not one of them, and there's a reason behind it.
Sure. Very complex historical reasons, and for the religious people, metaphysical reasons, for sure. Very serious topics. But you had one specific question you wanted to talk about before you went on that tangent.
It's a question of how do we go from understanding at least enough of the Jewishness and then applying it into your own life. Because do you think that is important? Like, I think the question of the context of all of Judaism is important for every Jew, because how else are you going to come to the conclusions of being the perfect Jew unless you're going to conform to a certain sect of Judaism? And I don't think conforming to a certain sect of Judaism is the best practice of Judaism. I'm putting these points forward to be challenged. If you don't like something, you're being heard. Challenge that opinion, because this is where
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out my own Jewish identity through these podcast series, and I will be definitely doing a playlist where I talk to as many Jews as possible, and maybe my inner part of my onion is no longer going to be that Western liberal, but that a Jew itself, and right now Jew is losing out. I'll tell you that. I think the problems facing we as a species are more important than we as Jews.
Well, yeah, that could be true, but not make the issues of Judaism any less important.
I would agree.
I mean, the fact that there are more pressing issues in the world, be it what happens when robots and machines become sentient when in the future, like that's a more pressing issue than many things in the Jewish community. But even so, on a communal level, tell any other community that what they're going through is unimportant. You can't do it. You know what I mean?
Well, I would
Any
say
community.
that's why I say the perfect Jew, as in how to be a perfect Jew. The question is very individualistic, where that final question of what are you going to do about it, it's going to be very different answers for every single Jew. So,
yeah, for sure, 100%. But in terms of choosing a sect of Judaism, like to me, and this is just my Avi Hoffman's view on the matter, it just comes down to where a person feels accepted and comfortable and part of a community. And it really boils down to no more or less than that. I choose to be an Orthodox Jew because many things in that community I find very, very wonderful and beautiful. Their commitment to education, their religious commitments, and one particular thing that I think is so beautiful about the Orthodox Jewish community is their commitment to charity and to helping other people. And that is something that is discussed in an open and important manner is something you don't find everywhere. And of course there are things I don't like about the community, but be that as it may, I think that where a person feels that they should be is no deeper a question than that, where they feel they should be, where they are most comfortable, where they feel that their Judaism is best expressed. To me, I find that's in the Orthodox Jewish community. And I'm a proud Orthodox Jew, and I'm happy to be an Orthodox Jew. And I'm very proud of the good things about my community where I can. I try to fix things which are, less than ideal.
can I ask you how long?
I think that's the answer to the question. I mean, I don't know if that's the answer.
Well, that was a perfect answer. I just think being a Jew should be like all things in life. It's a food web, not a food chain. That every little thing is attached to every other thing, maybe not as strongly attached. And the real question is, I think that is really, while I grow up in my own life and I'm hitting my 20s, I'm just now figuring out what I want to do with my own life. And one of those things was between the Jewishness and maybe doing something a little bit more attached to Jewishness and then the world as a whole. And like I said, I think the world as a whole is beating out the problems that are facing Jewish. And that's not to discount the problems. I'm saying the importance within my own life. I'm a very assimilated American Jew. Like,
right.
I would usually, like I said, maybe put that American, I'm still figuring out the American versus Jew part, but as of right now, I put that American label above my Jewish label. And is that because I'm a bad Jew, or is that because I'm a good American? I'm still figuring that out. And that's what I'm trying to figure out with these proposing propositions and having you hopefully challenge them. Is that how else are we going to figure something as fundamental on your own? I think that's very hard to figure out that you can do such a thing on your own. So I want to ask you.
There was this joke, like I don't mean to interrupt you, but there was this there was this joke regarding what you're saying now, where I don't remember who it was, but some Jewish American politician goes to meet Golda Meir, who was the first and only female Prime Minister of Israel, and he
Recall the
says to
name.
her before what?
I do recall. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you know. But he says to her, before we say anything, I want to tell you that first and foremost, I'm an American, then I'm a human, and then I'm a Jew.
Can you
And
put
she
the
says,
mic forward a little
"Oh,
bit?
I'm so sorry. Better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay." So he says, before we even talk about anything else, I want to say that first and foremost, I'm an American, and second, I'm a human being, and third, I'm a Jew. And she says, that's fine, because in Israel, we read from left to right, or from right to left, whatever. So we read the
That's
other way.
perfect. That's
Yeah.
that's a great joke. And I think that is exactly the problems. I think assimilation is the biggest problem dealing with Jews in America. And the biggest problem, me personally, is how much I have assimilated and what is that strongest identity. And based off of that, I'm going to decide what I want to maybe not spend like my career on, 40 hours a week, but at least part-time on trying to figure things out. And as this podcast grows and as I release more and more of them, I'm trying to commit to myself 5 podcasts a week, give myself the weekends off and record some more. And that's what I'm trying to figure out within this series of, I'm going to be talking to a lot of Jews, and let's figure out Jewishness as they gather. And like you said earlier, that Jewishness is much different to every Jew, and that's why it's important. And I'm just trying to, for the sake of simplicity and ease in operating in the world, it's much easier to look in the sect view and the lens of sex. And that because in life you need archetypes, you need those to deal with everything. And I know the world isn't so black and white, but they do provide a much easier way to navigate. So
yeah, definitely. They do make things simpler, but I think it's important to not fall into their trap.
Oh, definitely.
Because they do, it's important to remember that they are just tools to navigate the world and to not box people, oh, you're an Orthodox Jew, therefore X about you. I think that's a very dangerous assumption that people make.
Mm-hmm. And like I said earlier, just to stress the point even more on why I wanted you specifically, Avi Hoffman, before, is that you were one of the first few. It's such an actual thing within Judaism, that religious Judaism, where they do look down on other things. Maybe not express it, but if you do pride them and push them, they hold the belief. They won't maybe push it forward onto other people. They might still hold the belief based off of my conversations. But it was very clear with you that you did not hold that belief, and that's why I wanted to have you on so bad. Is because you broke that mold for me, and you made it so clear that I'm definitely someone who keeps on asking why, and at a certain point I do get a little bit annoying on why. And that's what I've learned from 2 to 4 year olds, is that they're wise beyond the ears. Their ability to ask why is perfect, and if you ever shush a 2 to 4 year old because you don't have the patience, then you shouldn't be hanging around 2 to 4 year olds. You should let them explore the world and figure things out. And let's actually focus this conversation a little bit more, and it's on a point that you're obviously a lot more educated on: rabbinic Judaism versus other sects of Judaism. And I think pre-rabbinic Judaism versus post-rabbinic Judaism, we're a much different religious people, because I know during the times of the temple, the Kohanim were a different sect of Jews than the actual. And it seems like your comment on Facebook, you have at least some wealth of knowledge on it, and I want to hear everything you can. Basically, first question: rabbinic Judaism versus other types of Judaism, and what is rabbinic Judaism?
Okay, well, rabbinic Judaism on one leg is essentially Judaism that bases itself on Talmudic and halachic ways of living. I would say that nowadays, all Orthodox, conservative, and Reform Jews are rabbinic Jews, because they all, to a large extent, go back to the Talmud as their spiritual ancestors, so to speak.
Yes.
Spiritual and cultural ancestors. So conservative, Reform, and Orthodox Jews are all rabbinic Jews. Nowadays, there are very few non-rabbinic Jews who are, part of a religious community in some sense. The big non-rabbinic community are the Karaite Jews, right? They are people who reject the the Talmud, and in fact the whole concept of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of oral tradition.
Are there still Karaites nowadays?
Oh yeah,
I did not even know that.
There are tens of thousands of Karaites in the United States and in Israel, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much.
Oh, really?
Like there are
That's
millions of other.
that's like a football field, like a football stadium. That's really not that much.
It's nothing, but I think that they're important and they do have interesting things to say.
So you want
And
to
I
actually?
am in active dialogue with certain Karaites because I think they are very interesting people.
You want to tell the people? I mean, personally, know what a Karaite is, but what's a Karaite? You said Shel Bapeh, which means of the mouth, so the oral tradition. Maybe you can speak a little bit more specifically.
The term Karaite comes from the Hebrew Karaim, and Karaim literally means the readers, because these are people who read the Bible, and that's it. That's pretty much where they get their religious, pardon the pun, orthodoxy from. That's where it comes from. Comes straight from the Bible, pretty much. They do have some modern practices which are interesting, and there's a lot of history in that community. Like, for example, some of them wear kippot, which is pretty rabbinic, I would think. Some of them keep the holiday of Hanukkah, which is not in the Bible at all, which is a post-biblical, holiday. Their version of it is that it was a non-rabbinic victory over the Greeks, whereas we would say it was a rabbinic victory over the Greeks. So it's a little bit of a different history, and where the details are true, where the facts are, it's a little bit hard to say because it's so far back in history. It's really hard to set those kinds of details straight.
I would say, in like most revolutions, it's probably a little mix of both.
Oh yeah, sure. There were definitely people
people from Judea that didn't support the rabbinic revolt, and the people who did, and that's very interesting. So it seems like, who are the major minds of the rabbinic Jews that without these people, rabbinic Judaism as we know it wouldn't be? Is there, like, I know Maimonides from Egypt was one. I know we have schools named after him in LA because he's such a large figure. So who should we look to when we're talking about rabbinic Judaism, and when are we talking about, when does this split happen? And is that post First Temple, post Second Temple, the medieval times? Is this the Spanish Inquisition that brought it, the necessity? When? Why?
Yes. So this is on one leg, kind of the history of these things. Maimonides is definitely one of the biggest figures in rabbinic Judaism, maybe the biggest, because he defined so many things for us, and he, created concepts which weren't in Jewish parlance before that. He made, without Maimonides, Judaism today would not be what it is, or rabbinic Judaism would, and other forms of Judaism would not be what it is today without him. He was maybe the most important figure in Jewish history. Now, Judaism, it's important to know, is not a religion that evolved in a bubble. We were a group of people who were in constant contact with the world around us. And much of our ideas and a lot of the things that we do today came about because they were decided in response to events that happened around them. So, for example, a lot of the things, like of the fundamental tenets of Jewish belief, and this is a whole discussion in and of itself, but many of the tenets of Jewish belief were discussed and were decided because there were heretical groups that popped up. And then we had to say, you cannot believe this, therefore this is a fundamental of our belief. This is a fundamental, without this you cannot be considered Jewish. And in large part, not most, but a lot of the fundamentals of Jewish belief were created because of groups like the Karaites, where rabbinic Jews were like, this is unacceptable what they're doing. This is now fundamental to being Jewish. You cannot be part of them and still be considered a full Jew.
Really? Because I know there's a joke that always they said there's two Jews with three opinions, and especially that I think Alicia gave me that joke. And do you think the world of pointing at things and saying this is the wrong way is a good way at dealing with it? Maybe it's a good way to deal with it in the medieval times, but how about circle it back to nowadays? So I think that's what a lot of modern Jews, their problem is that, or Orthodox Jews, is that they point this to be considered a good Jew is that you have to do not that, not do something, you have to do not that.
Yeah, it's very hard to come out on either side of this question because I see arguments, really convincing arguments on both sides. And I could paint either case for you. Which case would you like me to paint?
Let's paint the case of it's okay. We're talking about rabbinic Judaism. We're talking about Judaism that lasted another about 1,000 years after at least Maimo, which is, I think I Googled it. He's
1204. He died, I think.
Yeah, in Egypt, actually. He was a Sephardi Spanish Jew that seems to got maybe kicked out of Spain. I don't know. He went to Egypt. And he
left because he was encountered the Almohads, who were a very extreme group of Muslim rulers who basically did away with the concept of a dhimmi. Do you know what that is?
A demi? No,
dhimmi,
I'm not.
Dhimmi, D-I-M-H-I, I think. A dhimmi status was a political status that Jews and Christians held in many parts of the Muslim world, essentially as second-class citizens, which was wonderful for them because they were allowed to practice their religion. And for the most part, Jews are like, fine, call us second-class citizens, tax us more, but just leave us alone. Don't kill our children. Let us do our own thing. For most of Jewish history, that's what we've done, and that's how we've survived.
Defend Islam for a little bit. Islam was one of the most progressive major religions of its time.
No, I'm not knocking Islam at all. I think Islam is a really important monotheistic religion. Many Jewish ideas come from Islamic thinkers. So it's like more so in the world today. I don't know if you saw this, but in over a year ago, when the shootings happened in Christchurch in New Zealand. Yeah. Do you remember when that happened? I marched on Washington Square Park in solidarity with the 49 Muslims who were killed, because for many reasons, but first and foremost, I think that nobody should go to any house of worship and be killed.
Oh, that's unacceptable on every single level.
Absolutely.
I support everyone's freedom of speech rights. I don't support any rights to attack people or kill people, to commit terror, even more. It's horrible, evil, unacceptable.
Yeah.
But it circled back to the Maimo point.
So with Maimonides, he when the Almohads came into his town, they did away with this dhimmi status, and they said, you either convert to Islam or you die. So he lived for a good portion of his life externally as a Muslim, and that's why he left Spain, because he wanted to get away from those extreme. He wanted to live as a Jew, so he left that part of the world.
And he went to Egypt.
He lived some time in Israel. He became the doctor of the Sultan. He was like one of the most
stories I do recall. Him being a doctor of the Sultan. It's been a while since my Jewish history class. But so let's circle back to the Jewishness through not copying other people, pointing at people and saying, well, that's a sect of Jewishness, but not a sect that we can accept. So
so in terms of the
let's
positive,
hear those arguments
for why that's acceptable, why that's a good thing, or why that's an okay thing, let's just say, because it all comes down to the question. At a certain point, you have to ask yourself, where do you draw the line, right? Where do you draw the line in anything? And this doesn't only apply in religion or culture. This applies in even the most mundane things. So to give maybe a less charged example, we'll talk about baseball. Okay? If you take the game of baseball and you say, instead of 3 strikes, it's 5 strikes. And instead of holding a bat, you have to hit it with your hand. And instead of this kind of ball, it's a ball that bounces. And instead of a home run fence, we have a goal post and you have to get through the post. Right? As many changes as you want to make, okay, fine. But at what point do you say this isn't baseball anymore? Right? Where do you draw the line?
I would say that's a very interesting point.
So now to take this back to Judaism, when you have groups that are changing this and changing this and changing that and changing that, the rabbis are saying, okay, fine, do what you want. I mean, they're not really saying that, but we'll say, fine, do what you want. But at what point are you already not Jewish anymore? At what point do you draw the line? And that's where the response comes and says, okay, this is a fundamental, this you cannot change. This you have to keep the same. And this defines what a Jew is.
Well, I
That
say
is the
you
positive
explain it
argument.
that way makes it a lot more clear. And I do appreciate that. That's definitely something I need to think back on and actually, think days actually have it as a thought that I deal with. Because that's a very good point. When you're giving that example, I'm thinking about the college football, XFL, NFL, and all those things. At what point is it arena football versus national football and college football, where they have different rules? And I say all of those fall under the realm of football, but when do you get to rugby? At what point
Right.
what point did you change the name of the sport? You're playing another game.
Yeah.
Where you think about hockey and soccer, it's essentially the same sport, except one is done on a field, another is done on the ice, and you have expanded bounds. And I think that's a very and maybe I do fall on the realm of rabbinic Judaism, because who else are you going to leave it up to except experts in Jewishness itself, who are rabbis? Who else are you going to leave it up to?
Well, that raises the question: who gets to call themselves an expert in Judaism?
I say someone who spent all their times on focusing it, but I'm sure there's some Karaites
Yeah.
who
I mean,
can
these are
make.
not people to be taken lightly. They really know their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they have their own, they don't call them rabbis, they call them chachamim, which are wise men, but nevertheless, it comes down to more or less the same thing. These are people who spent their whole life studying the religion and applying it. And they are very serious people, not to be taken lightly. And many people who don't know about them do treat it lightly, as if this is just a very simplistic cult.
Well,
No, it's not. It's very complicated.
well, I can say on my experience and my knowledge, I say I come on that I don't know enough, so I can't speak on it. But maybe a rabbi does know enough to actually speak on it if you spent actually the amount of times these rabbis were spending. So maybe you have a point to counter it. You said you have one example for the pro rabbinic Judaism as the actual Judaism. What about one that can't counter to that point?
Meaning in terms of why it's not a good thing to judge, to
Point
look at other.
and say that's not actual Judaism. This is actual Judaism.
Very simple. It's exclusionary, and you're going to end up creating rifts and strife and internal issues with your community. You're going to break up families. It's going to create a lot of problems, and it has. Like, how many fights today are caused over? How much proverbial blood is spilled nowadays over? Oh, he's a reform person. He's a conservative. We don't have to take their opinion seriously. Once you create boundaries, you say this is the line, then you've created a line, and that itself causes problems.
Well, let's bring it to a modern world. I've seen at least 3-4 rabbis on Facebook being shared around, and I've said this rabbi is absolutely dumb and he shouldn't be speaking about anything to do with health. And I think that's maybe a failure on my part to realize that he's not speaking to the health wise, but I'm thinking that the things he's saying, to keep on going to shul, do these things, do that things, God will have your back. I'm like, no. And basically, at least enough knowledge of my Judaism, I think that's wrong, even in the context of Judaism. No. And how do we stop such things? Like, is that okay to allow in our Jewish world to have?
I think not. And I actually wrote a very long post about this very thing. I wrote a whole post about how much it broke my heart that somebody could make such a thing from a Jewish perspective, could make such an argument, and how important health is as a Jewish value, how we violate Shabbat to save a life, doesn't matter who, or even if we have the potential to save a life, and that somebody could make this decision, and now we're seeing the consequences of that decision.
Maybe not
Jewishness,
but there's a case, I think, in Louisiana of a preacher who had and he ended up dying of coronavirus. That he ignored the local order to stay closed. He didn't, and he ended up catching it and dying. And I thought that was I feel very bad that he did die, but I have no remorse for him. He did stupid things and ended up.
Yeah.
So, do you want to go more specifically about your counter on why it's so bad? You're saying about health is important, but maybe you have a conclusion statement, topic sentence, the strong counter from a religious point of view to any of those
Yeah.
who think that they can do that.
Yes. So as I would tell this to a religious person, to an Orthodox Jew, it would be, pretty much what I just said. That if I would show him a list of sources in Jewish writing from 2,000 years ago up till 50 years ago, throughout that entire span, about how important health is, how health is the number one concern in Jewish life, how we violate almost anything for even the potential to save a human life, and then go into all the things that the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control have been saying about this disease, and just to say this is the kind of decision where we look to medical experts for what the Jewish perspective should be. This is not something where someone without a medical degree can give you the Jewish perspective.
Interesting.
Because health is the Jewish perspective. It's not that I'm being less religious by ignoring what a rabbi says in terms of ignoring health. He's being less religious by ignoring what the health experts are saying. That's the religious argument I would give for that.
That's good. So let's actually use that as a jumping off point in total Judaism. It's if you have a religious service in a community as being affected by coronavirus, you're being a bad Jew to have that religious service and having everybody sit closely to each other within 6 feet. Everyone's breathing each other's air. You're gonna have one of those cases where, we had 80 transmissions in one location, and instead of it being 4 to the X, it's 80 to the X for at least that rate. And how can you translate that from, yarmulkes are okay versus, Saturday, that means you don't drive the car or don't mix meat and dairy? At what point do you think use coronavirus as a jumping off point to say, no, that is not Jewishness?
Can you explain the question one more time? I'm not sure exactly I understand.
What is the limiting factor that allows you to choose that if you're a bad Jew, if you hold a religious service versus not holding a religious service, or to wear a kippah and not wear a kippah? What is the limiting factor? You said it's health in the case of coronavirus. I'm saying, could it be something else?
What I mean is that health is the most, like, there are maybe 2 or 3 Jewish values that are more important than health. And,
what are those?
And going to synagogue is not one of them.
Okay. And what is above health? What is the limiting factor? What allows the rabbis to say this is Jewishness and that is not Jewishness? Because if it just says I'm a rabbi and I've studied this 100 hours of things, or 100 hours a week, more than 10 plus hours a day, no, that's not good enough for me. You have to point towards the Talmudic source, the Gemaric source of what is the most fundamental thing about being Jewish. What is the limiting factor?
Meaning, why is health more important than all those other things? Is that the question?
Well, I'm trying to go beyond health. The health was the reason within coronavirus. I'm trying to figure out what is Judaism, what is its identity. And I think, like I said, on the education front, if you're asking questions around the actual point, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to get in circles. I'm trying to find the root. I'm trying to pull the plant at the stem, not at the leaves.
I just think that Judaism is a process. It's a process of legal theory. It's a process of living a certain way. It's a process of spirituality, and it's a process of thinking about certain questions about the world. Much more than that process, a lot of things are, changing within each generation. And I don't know if there's one value that kind of ties it all together.
So what is you said one or two values above health? What are they?
Well, what I meant by that is that there are like one or only a couple, very few things that we would do. No, let me rephrase that. I'm sorry. There are only a couple things that are more important than saving a human life in
Okay.
Jewish law.
All right. I'm trying to think
So
back to what those things are, but I can't recall. It's been a
there are
while
three
since my.
things.
All right. Let's hear them.
One is idolatry, right? According to the technical definitions of Jewish law, you would not be allowed to worship something that's an idol to save your own life or someone else's life.
That's
That's
very
number.
biblical. What
Yeah.
about very biblical? Because idol is very, well, go more in the weeds on each of those. But the next one,
Next one is murder. Would not be allowed to murder to save your own life.
that one's very clear.
Yeah. And the third are certain kinds of sexual immorality, different kinds of things. Like would not be allowed to sleep with a married woman to save your life.
It's very interesting. I still would love to hear the biblical argument on. I can guess on. I know on my moral level, I say that is a problem between her and her own husband. No other. Specifically, I think you're doing a bad thing by tempting a lady.
Mm-hmm.
But besides the actual temptation, I don't see it as a bad act on your part.
Yeah, I hear your perspective. I hear your point of view.
Like,
But I'm just saying from a Talmudic perspective. And of course, each of these three things have huge discussions about what they mean specifically. What does it mean to commit idolatry? What is it,
that's
under
another
what circumstances?
episode I'm going to have with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to commit a whole episode to probably one for each one, or a whole episode for all three, because you left me a lot of things to think about. And
Good.
I think the most important one is the pointing and choosing what is Jewishness and what is not. And you gave the limiting principle of life itself and health. And above those are the three that you gave me
Mm-hmm.
that I will think about. But I
But of
think,
course, Judaism is more than just being a healthy person. It's
yeah.
much more than that.
And
And there are things which are, not relevant to health, which are very Jewish and very important. So that's why I'm a little bit pushing back on the question of what is the principle of Judaism, because I personally don't think there is such a thing. That's really what I'm getting at here.
the closest I got to is the free will part. And it's being a good person in all aspects of your life. That's my limiting principle when it comes to
Okay.
Jewishness. That I don't think there's Jewishness if there's a deterministic world. I think Jewishness would crumble within a deterministic world. And in free will, it's literally God putting Himself within you, your neshama, and creating gods out of ourselves by allowing us to have free will and to make good within the chaos. Our order in the world can either be good order or bad order. And it's our responsibility as Jews to provide goodness and make the world a little bit better. That's my answer to what is the limiting principle of Jewishness. It's called being a good person, not necessarily a good Jew, but a good person. And I haven't figured out anything because, like you said, you can save a life. You can break Shabbos to save a life. That means being a good person is more important than being a good Jew. And I would counter why by being a good Jew, you're being a bad Jew if you keep the Shabbos and not save the person's life.
Yeah. So there, it's not a conflict between being a good person and being a good Jew. There, being a good Jew requires breaking Shabbos. One who doesn't break Shabbos in that case is being a bad Jew.
Yeah. And I'm just using the colloquial definition of Jew in that first thing. And I think that's a lot is that, what's his name? His fallacies. I have the book right here. It's fallacies in the world and how you deal with them. And one of those fallacies is that you change the definition of a word.
Mm-hmm.
And that to think you hold those things as the same thing, but if you change the definition of the word mid, it's one of the major fallacies in good logic and reason. And that's where I find my limiting principle. But I definitely want to think hard and long. Here, this is a book one of my professors helped write with good reason, that by S. Morris Engel. And It's a logic book. It goes through Plato's fallacies. I think it was Plato. I forget. And that's where I'm still holding. But your Mimo and the rabbis thinking about the baseball game definitely changed my view.
So can I ask you one more question regarding one thing you said?
Sure.
Because you said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, misunderstanding what you said, but I believe you said that to be a good Jew, first and foremost, means to be a good person.
Yes.
And if I were to reframe that, I would say that what a good person, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, because in my mind I made this very complicated, but simple as possible. A good person does good things and avoids bad things.
True.
Like, as a very simple definition. But I think that still doesn't really tell us anything important, because it doesn't tell us what those good things are. It doesn't tell us what those bad things are. It doesn't really give us much. And I think in a sense it's kind of tautological, because it goes in circles. You need to be a good person, and that means you need to do good things, but it doesn't tell us anything of real substance there. Do you understand my question?
I would say that what are you or what are we but the like I said, we're nature. I didn't say, but we're nature versus nurture, a mixture of the both. And we can't, it's very hard, like the idea of you can't fit in someone else's shoes, so it's very hard to tell. So it really comes down to the person and their own Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, and the combat between them two. And you know what's good and what is wrong. You have a voice inside your head letting you know that you're doing the best operating on the information you have, and doing the worst operating the information you have. So I think in psychology it's called the counterance. Whatever in your head that's telling you good versus bad, and you know what is good versus bad, and on a moral level. And I think Judaism provides a compass that we can all use, but I think a much more important compass is everyone's personal compass and what they can do to make their world good and bad. And I think it's, if you're doing something with the intent, like there's a reason why we have manslaughter versus first degree murder, is because intent does matter. And those of, I don't think it's a circle. It might be a circle, but the circle is rolling us forward into a better world. Like imagine you're on a log and you're running in a circle. Yes, like you said, to be a good Jew is to be a good person. To be a good person is to be a good Jew. All these things, but you're on top of the log running and it's slowly moving forward, or you're running and it's slowly moving back. So I agree, it is a circle. It's an infinity
loop. What does it
loop.
mean to be a good person? Or does it mean to be a good Jew? Does that mean, same questions I asked before?
Listen to your Yetzer Hara and your Yetzer Tov.
What are those? What does that mean? How do I know when my Yetzer Hara is talking, when my Yetzer Tov is talking?
I think everyone has their own moral compass, and to think that you come up to a place and it says take one candy and you choose to take two, you know that's a bad choice. With every action, there's going to be at least like the stereotypical, archetypical one devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. You know which one is the good action, which one's the bad action. And if you're unsure, inaction is sometimes the better choice. And I think it's very important to challenge people, because if we, instead of another fallacy, appeal to authority, I think, like I said, personal autonomy is the most important part of my body, my soul, my existence, is that everyone has their own moral compass. And if you definitely go towards the positive end rather than the negative end, go to true north versus true south, is that we need to get a little bit better. And we do know. I think you do know what is better and worse in your life. I think most people can figure out, at least not in the context of what is good, but they can choose which one's better. Did I answer your question?
I don't know, because sometimes it's very complicated and it's not at all clear which is the better, or like in a Sophie's choice kind of decision, where there's two equal two items where they're both really bad and both really good. It's not always clear which the right one to do is. It's not always clear.
Say the right one is based off the information you have, and if you don't have enough information, I think it would require you to seek more information. And in the case of Sophie's choice, I agree. There's no right choice.
It's kind of like the trolley problem, right? Like there are arguments for both sides, for both actions, and
I fall under.
I'm not convinced either one is the right choice. You know, like it's
like
hard.
it's in I like that. I prefer the political election problem: Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton.
Sure.
It's a much easier trolley problem to think of. But to circle back on the trolley problem, it's
Do you
very
vote for
hard.
one, or do you stay at home? Do you not vote?
I vote down ballot. That's who I vote. I'm a very strong believer in your vote is maybe not a direct endorsement, but it has some weight behind it. So I wouldn't vote for it unless you pass a certain degree. But
we could spend all the time talking about this, but I think that most people shouldn't vote. That's my feeling.
I agree.
Because I feel if you don't know enough, if you don't know what the president's job is, if you don't know what his role is in government, you shouldn't vote.
I agree. I'm actually been seriously thinking about. I know there's been some racist past of like having poll tests, actual tests. I think there should be a test on basic government. Like unless you you have to at least get a D on basic government, like the government class you take in senior year of high school, the structure of the federal government, federalism, that a basic like science test, see if you're paying attention during your high school science classes, and like a basic current events test. And I think maybe that should be, I'm still thinking about that. That's a hypothesis that I have not held concretely. Still wet, so don't come too strong at me, people.
Yeah, that's funny. I had a similar idea when I was in college going through getting my political science degree. And of course the whole idea of having a poll test is so racially charged that it's probably not a good idea to even suggest it in the first place. But the idea I thought about in college was asking people 10 basic civics questions and then giving their vote weight based on how many they get right. So if you get 7 right, you get 7 votes. 10 right, you get 10 votes. 1, you get 1, and 0, you get nothing.
Oh my God. Well, you at least get, how many choices have? It's multiple choice. You at least get.
It is multiple choice, yeah.
At least 1 in 4, 1 in 5, right? So whatever. I think that's a very interesting idea. I don't think where we are in the status quo is now that such a test would even be viable. Like I don't think it's a helpful conversation even to have. But in an ideal world, I think in an ideal world we would have, like, for example, this last primary, I didn't vote in it. Why? Because I didn't spend the necessary time to vote in it. I wasn't going to vote. Last time I spent like 30 minutes to an hour just doing basic research online. It doesn't even take that much time. If you paid attention in class on how to do basic research online and get reliable sources, it took me 30 minutes to an hour, and I felt comfortable enough voting. And that's with me regularly already reading the news. So I'm definitely a different case. But based on my conversations of people and I've had, and they're like, wait, you haven't thought about this point and you're voting for that person? It worries me.
Yeah.
Because I do vote. I was a political science major, actually, but I changed majors to geology. So comparative. My favorite part of it was comparative politics.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So interesting. So interesting. I have some of my favorite essays I've written in college still saved on my computer because I would just love the research I got to do for them.
So let's actually start wrapping this up. And is there any questions you want me or anybody else to finish off on?
Yeah, I want to ask you a personal question regarding this whole thing. What steps are you taking to actively, or besides having these conversations, to learn more about Judaism, to further your Jewish identity? Are you doing research on your own, learning, reading any good books? Have you read any good books lately that you can recommend for me?
Well, I'm saying, me personally, the way I learn is from other people. I'm an audible versus visual learner. But like mostly audible, and I learn with visual help. Like I'm not going to remember a name unless I see it. that's what I'm trying to do with these podcasts. I'm actually talking with my the friend I had the first podcast with, that we're going to start a podcast and go through the 4,000 years of Jewish history bit by bit. And once we get to the medieval, I want to have you on and give the religious perspective. But the way that I've conducted myself since probably the age of 5 is let's learn from everything. Learn from everything is how am I doing this? And every opportunity I meet with a Jew, I at least spend at least 5 to 10 minutes talking about Jewish identity. And that's how I've lived my life for the last, since I can remember. Like, it's so random. Like, I meet a Jew in the, like, you meet a Jew in public, and for example, I used to work at a smoothie place, and I was asking, it was during the holidays, and I said, Merry Christmas, and she's like, oh, for me, it's Happy Hanukkah, and I said, oh, Happy Hanukkah, and then we talked for a few minutes about our Jewish identities, and every opportunity I have to speak, I want to listen to someone else, and that slowly but surely changed my identity.
Sure. Okay. There you go. That's awesome.
Okay. So I usually like finishing off. Let's actually finish off maybe one last point, something nice. Yes. And watch any good films lately with this coronavirus, because I do read your blog every so often that you post, because I do enjoy the critique of film, not only film itself.
Wow, any good films? I haven't had time lately. I've been so busy reading and getting through lots of books.
What about your favorite film of last year? Was it 1917 or was it, what's it called, Parasite?
Honestly, I think my favorite film that I've seen in the past year, let's just say the past 12 months, favorite film was Joker.
Oh, really?
Because I just thought that the portrayal of mental illness and just making the Joker a relatable, empathetic, a character you could have empathy for, even while he was doing horrible things, but he was doing the horrible things because of the horrible things happening in his own head, which were largely not his fault, was so masterfully done, and such a brilliant meta commentary on mental health and on poor versus rich, and on, you know, the city of New York City, which is where I live. That's like my city. So, you know, Gotham is New York City. You must know that. I'm sure everyone knows that.
Is it really? I thought it's supposed to be like a fake another city that's supposed to be a lot like New York.
It's like a fake New York City.
Yeah.
But it's New York City, basically. Another name for New York City is Gotham, actually, in real life. That is one of the names of New York City. But I loved Joker. Joker was so interesting.
What is Metropolis supposed to be?
Metropolis? I have no idea.
Superman City?
Oh, that actually is. Oh, I think that's also New York City, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
I saw the crime happening in New York. Okay, I'll tell you what my favorite film of last year. It was 1917. Yeah. My favorite part of film is cinematography. So that one shoot throughout the whole thing, the audio, visual. Oh, it's such a wonderful film. Second favorite was the thriller Parasite, and then after that, probably Harley Quinn.
Sure.
It's very funny that I have like film critic, and then my last one is some relaxed movie that was definitely one big joke. But we're talking about favorite. I enjoyed that movie a lot.
You like it? That's the important thing.
Oh yeah, Margot Robbie stole a part of my heart. Especially Margot Robbie using a sledgehammer to hammer people's heads in while doing extreme martial arts.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the Kill Bill me and me.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, cool. So I'll finish off this of what did I learn from this podcast in particular, because that's what the point is. I learned about Judaism and how we went from regular Judaism to more of rabbinic as time passed. And at a certain point, the rabbis did start writing down what is acceptable and unacceptable. The question of Judaism and the ideas of idolatry, murder, sexual immortality over life, and the question of being a good Jew versus being a good person. And these are things I will be thinking about for the next few days for sure. Anything you learned particularly? Did I propose any points that changed your point of view?
Yeah, I'm thinking more about Jewish identity in terms of having a more practical definition, which I think is important. And I definitely, I'm starting to think that some form of religious commitment is crucial to Jewish identity, at least for me. Although, I guess there are many different kinds of Jewish commitments which are not religious, and there's just community, Zionism, and that kind of thing. But overall, something, a lot of things to think about in terms of what is the definition of Jewish identity? How do you personally define, and how do you think other people should define, if I or anyone else can say such a thing about other people? Something to think about. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if I have the right
What about
answer,
on
but
the area of education? How do you feel about my proposition on to change education itself? Is that we need to change our goal post and shift education from teaching a class to teaching thinking and reasoning as a whole.
yeah, I mean, to me, the biggest thing I've experienced, or yeah, no, the biggest thing I've experienced that I think kind of portrays your point is that people, when they're in school, they get so wrapped up in the grade and get so caught up in the score and all that they get depressed because they're not doing well in a class, or they're not getting the right grade, and it takes such a toll on people and their mental health that they don't have any energy to focus on the learning anymore. That's what I've seen happen with some of my students as well as some of my classmates when I was in college, and to an extent that happened to me during some semesters as well. It's a very painful thing to be in school because I love learning, and to not be able to focus because I'm so nervous about the grade, about the score, and how much it's overvalued, and how you know it is that is seen as the main part of school. That is definitely a problem, something to work on, something to talk about. And
Well, I hope that you try to change the message for your students and let them know that they're in, you said, as young as second grade to eighth grade, that it really doesn't matter what your grade is at those points. Yeah, maybe a change of the high school you get into, but once again, it doesn't really matter if you adjust those points in your early years. It doesn't matter. It's much more important at those ages to figure out how to think better, how to do those things. So let's finish off with one final point that I've been asking all my guests is, what is your lowest grade and why? Mine was a
lowest.
D plus in a math class, arithmetic algebra 2/trig honors. And why is because I went in with some hubris and I did not pay attention. And I was like, I can figure this out on my own mid test. And let's just say logarithms, I got a 30% on that test.
Yeah, well, my lowest grade, hate to admit it, was an F.
Oof.
And not much lower than that. I got an F twice, for two very different reasons. The most recent one was actually, that was real problem because that was in my last class of college, and that was because the teacher had completely messed up and lost all record of me ever being in class. And I had submitted all the papers, done all the tests, done all the assignments, and she, like, it's as if I never even showed up to the class. So she posted an F, and I went to the deans, and it took me like 3 months of fighting and going back and forth and showing my papers and going through this whole process. But in the end, they switched that F from that to a C minus, and I got my diploma. So that was
Really?
like
They don't.
super, yeah,
Ooh, that hurts. That hurt
yeah.
me. I wonder what type of hurt it gave you.
Oh God, yeah, that was a
Ooh,
mess.
I would just like go to that teacher and just like grab her, like, who got your teaching credentials? I do, I do. And just yank that
Yeah,
away. Because how do you understand, like, you mess up that bad? And I imagine you had some proof. You had those essays, you had other stuff, and just
yeah.
you're calling me a liar? Like, do you see the beard? Do you see the thing? Like, if I was lying, I'm going straight to go ahead. I'm like, help a brother out. Well,
Yeah,
thankfully,
exactly.
I haven't experienced anybody. Well, thank you so much, Avi. I want to thank all of you if you're still listening. Thank you.
Thank
deep
you.
dive in Jewish
Yeah.
identity. And I hope you all are also thinking about your Jewish identity, and you all have a good and blessed day. Goodbye.